You may remember last week when Jesus was talking to us, he said, "Make friends with dishonest wealth, so that in the world to come they might remain your friends." He didn't say it like that, but he said it mostly like that. "Use dishonest wealth to make friends for yourself in the kingdom to come," he said. And we might say that today's parable that Jesus tells, which is one of his more unusual parables, is exactly what happens when you don't make friends with dishonest wealth. Last week in our youth group, we were talking with the high school students about street workers in Chicago who were offering a ministry of love that was based on a call from Christ in a church. And that was one of the things they saw in a video was the street workers said, "Jesus calls us to become friends of the poor, to know their names, to have relationships with them." And so he told them in the video, "Get to know the poor." And it's a lovely statement, and it's actually a statement that broadly applied would be a great medicine on our society, getting to know people, getting to be friends with people, especially people who are of different economic classes or political beliefs. But in this case, the advice was very specific: become a friend of the poor, get to know the poor. I think sometimes we see aid as merely a material thing. We say, well, just load up the warehouse with cans of food and dry goods. And that's not bad. I mean, people need food. But they also need dignity. They need relationship. They need love and friendship. And so Jesus is essentially giving the same advice. And in the Greek it says the wealth earned unrighteously, or unrighteous wealth. So we'll say dishonest wealth is the translation. But even if you've dirtied your hands in the world doing business, you can still do good things with that. And Jesus says, make good friends, and in this case we have someone who doesn't. We have someone whose material prosperity actually cuts him off from the poor, whose material prosperity has him retreat into a fortress of his own making to protect himself from the various vagaries of life, the suffering of others. And though the world might have problems, he doesn't. He's busy planning menus for the next party. It says he feasted every day. Now, the interesting detail about this story, which is often commented on, is we don't know his name. In the world of the Bible, and in the imagination of the Bible, his name is not even worth mentioning, or his name is forgotten to the Bible as it is the poor's name to us. Notice the poor man's name is recorded, and the rich man's name is not. This is the exact opposite of how the world works and operates. If I say Carnegie, Vanderbilt, all these names of J.P. Morgan, everyone knows those names, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, we know the names of the rich. In the same way that when we go on vacation and visit the great churches of the past, we oftentimes go and visit their empty homes, which are now museums. Have you gone to the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina? It's a beautiful house. There's even some in LA you can visit. I enjoy visiting the houses of dead rich people and seeing they brought in stone from Spain, and they brought in this chapel from Portugal, Hearst Castle, for example. Beautiful, wonderful monuments of architecture. And their names remain preserved, just not in the Bible, and not in the economy of the kingdom. The names that God is writing down are names like Lazarus, the unknown, forgotten poor. It says he was at the gate of the rich man, but really what it says was he was brought daily to the gate of the rich man. He is so disabled, or so malnourished, or he's so brought down that people have to carry him around, and they dump him there hoping that a person that has more than enough will share, and the gate stays closed. There was no social service. There was no, well, let's see if we can get you some help. Call 211 and see who might provide food for you. All you had was each other. All you had were the neighbors you had. And so every day he's brought to this man's gate, and he's so weak that the dogs come and lick his sores. The dogs have something to satisfy themselves, but he doesn't. And this is the world that Jesus sets up, the warning for those who have not made friends with their dishonest wealth. And then, as happens to both of them, they die. And part of this idea of dishonest wealth is to say it is something that will not be enduring. Last week we talked about forgiveness as a kind of investment strategy. Be a person that forgives and make that your investment into the world and see what becomes possible with that. We might say that today Jesus is talking to us also about interdimensional investment. It's one thing to invest in corn or commodities, to say, let's put some money in the railroad. It's another thing to say, let's put some treasure in heaven. And that's language that gets used in the gospel fairly frequently. Save for yourself treasures in heaven. And so Jesus is talking about a kind of interdimensional investment. We are not just caring for those who are in need. We are actually investing in the kingdom to come. And unfortunately, this person made the wrong investment. His investments were bound in time and space. And when he died, all of that was cut off. And all he had was himself. And he found out that when all the feasting was gone, all the couches and friends, all the music and gathering, he literally had nothing but himself, and he was poor. Turned out that he had everything backwards. The spiritual poverty of his life is revealed in Hades. You'll notice the angels come and get Lazarus when he dies, and when this guy dies, he is unclaimed. It just says he died. No one came to get him. This is something in the early church they would talk about when you were baptized. They would make the sign of the cross on your forehead, as we still do. And that was the shepherd's mark, so that when you die, the angels will see the cross on your forehead, and they will bring you to heaven, because you belong to that sheepfold. That was the idea with making the sign of the cross, or at least one of the ideas. In the early church, during the Roman times, they thought that's where ghosts came from. They were merely the people that had never been claimed. They belonged to nobody. And we might say that he's one of them. And it says he's being tormented. And he's in his torment, and he sees a family of belonging that he's outside of. He has no friends there. He made no friends there. Now, this idea of torment, and sometimes it's even translated torture, sometimes makes us a little uneasy. It's like, why is someone being tortured? But it shouldn't really be described that way. It's more he was being tested. If you remember, or if you knew, even from ancient times, they would test the purity of metal with touchstones. We still use that. It's a touchstone. And a touchstone was just a black stone that they would scrape metal on. Like if you had a ring, you could scrape a ring on it. And it would leave a trail if it was pure metal. And if it didn't leave a trail, it was fake. Or it was some kind of impure metal. And in fact, you can test today, even now, you can test even the purity of the carats by scraping different lines and then using acid to figure out how many carats are in the gold. It's an ancient way of looking at the purity of metal, and that's what's happening to this guy. He's being scraped on the touchstone. And it turns out there's no gold there. I think they keep scraping him, trying to find something. Is there anything of worth in this person? And so far they find nothing. He is someone who is unclaimed, someone who does not have friends in Abraham's family, and as they test him, they find him wanting. And the interesting thing is when he sees Abraham, he recognizes Lazarus. He doesn't go, who is that? He knew his name. And we realize one of the terrifying details, he knew exactly who was outside his gate every day. He even knew his name. And he was unmoved by his suffering, and he was unmoved by his hunger. Again, when people hear that language of torment, they kind of feel bad for the guy, and they go, well, that poor guy, he shouldn't be tormented. But every time I've heard the story, I was thinking about this week, I've never heard anyone feel that bad for Lazarus. No one says, well, he was tormented too, he was tortured too, he had the dogs on him, he was so weak he couldn't even move. And I think most of us go, yeah, but that just happens to people. I've seen people like that at the beach. I've seen people like that in the Walmart parking lot. Just some people have bad luck. And we are unmoved by their torment. And we almost feel bad for the rich person, which is also something indicative of our age. We oftentimes feel badly for the rich. But in this case, he wants Lazarus to come and serve him like he was served at one of his feasts. We see the character, or the quality of his character, or the lack of quality in his character, that he sees Lazarus as a servant who can come and relieve his torment. And what he doesn't realize is he's thirsty like Jesus was thirsty on the cross. He's thirsty for communion with God. He's thirsty for friendship with God. And he's grown so into himself that he can't even imagine that the world was made for a kind of special communion. That's one reason Jesus says on the cross, "I am thirsty." He says that because he's thirsty for us. He's thirsty for the Lazaruses. He's thirsty for the rich people. He's thirsty for the virtuous. He's thirsty for the villains. He's thirsty for the world to be drawn to his burning heart of love. And for those who have heard that call, and for those who have been moved by that, we get something like the advice of Paul to Timothy, which is, don't trust in the uncertainty of your possessions. Don't trust in the uncertainty of your riches. If you have it, good. Just don't be haughty. Don't be proud. Don't cut yourself off from your neighbor. That's what Paul says to Timothy. Rather, he says, trust in God. Root your life in the meaning of your life in that relationship, and do good with what you have, says Paul. But remember the primary relationship and root of your existence, this communion that Jesus is thirsty for, that the rich man in Hades is thirsty for. Those who are living and those who are dead are all meant to be claimed by the shepherd. Tonight in the high school youth group, they're going to be reading a diary of an early Christian martyr, Perpetua and Felicity. They were two young women in their 20s, young mothers, one of them, in Carthage, and they get arrested for their faith, and they get fed to the animals to celebrate the birthday of the emperor. And we still have, 18 centuries later, their diary. And we have stories of this that have been retold, and it's this very interesting vision that one of them's given about taking a stairway to heaven over the head of a dragon who's trying to kill them, and finding themselves welcomed by a loving shepherd who says, "I'm glad you're here." And that's precisely what we were made for. It's precisely why God loves us, is God has made a pathway so God can say, "I'm glad you're here." And that's why Paul is encouraging Timothy, combine godliness with contentment. I love that little phrase. I was thinking about that this week, preparing for the sermon. Godliness and contentment combined together. One of the great problems with religion is people who are godly oftentimes become miserable people, or they become hard to be around, or they become scolds and kind of joyless shells of themselves. And Paul tells Timothy, be godly, do holy things, but be content. Rest in the contentment of being called and belonging to that holy flock. And then, because you know who you are, pursue things like righteousness, pursue things like justice, pursue things like getting to know the names of the poor, pursue doing things that God has set before you, that others might come to know, that they too are invited into this holy embrace. Jesus gives us a fairly strong parable about what happens when we trust in the uncertainty of things that will not see us through our living, our dying, and our living again. But he himself becomes the way through that, around it and for it, whether you're a young Christian woman in Carthage or a young Christian woman in Huntington Beach in 2022. The gift is the same. And it's precisely this love that opens us to the fullness and riches of God, riches we can share with those around us, even if they're like Lazarus at the gate, looking to be loved and uplifted. Amen.